Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Jeff Nicholson, who is global leader of CRM strategy at Pega. Hey, Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be back here with you.
Well, absolutely great to be back, because the last time we did this was in Pega World in July 2018. I checked my records and I'm like, oh my God, those were the days, right? So, Jeff, for people that are not familiar with kind of you and the work that you do, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on kind of your background and the sort of the work that you do at Pega and kind of what Pega's all about?
Sure, you bet. So, of course, you and I have known each other for some time. I've been in the CRM space for a long, long time. But when it comes to the change that we're seeing right now in the CRM space and the change that we believe we're helping usher in at Pega, it's around organizations finally get to a point where they can, what we think of as crush complexity.
Right.
Things have gotten very complicated in everything from our systems, but even our strategies have to change. And in the old days of CRM, we remember all the messages where you could just, the promises of the vendors were just dropping this whole new stack. It'll all be great when you get to the other side, just trust us.
Yeah.
And it just, not only are those days gone, it's few and far between where those opportunities are really going to be around. And you have to succeed now, despite the complexities you have in place.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've talked before together about how we finally take principles like yours with Punk CX and find ways to forge ahead. And the way I think about it, and when it comes to customer service, is how do we simplify service?
Mm-hmm.
Despite our complexities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that it?
Absolutely. So, I mean, Jeff, we wanted to talk about a couple of things that has been floating around and over the last couple of months as a piece of research, and some stuff that we've kind of like had a back and forth on, and just like the way that things are emerging. But before we get into that, before we get into the weeds, as it were, the last 15, 16 months or so have been strange, let's say, different. I mean, and it's and affected different people in different ways. And we haven't spoken in a while, so just wanted to say, how are you doing, man?
Well, thankfully, knock on wood, I'm doing wonderful, and great. We're lucky enough that we haven't had anyone that's been really tremendously impacted by the pandemic close to us, but we know of others in our outer circle, and we've seen a lot change in the nature of work. Certainly the way that just doing our daily jobs. But as well in our client base, haven't we? So our clients have had to make dramatic shifts over that time. So it used to be the days where if you had a customer service team, they were sitting side by side, kind of shoulder to shoulder in cubicles. If they had an issue, they could just pop their heads up, kind of gopher style, and ask the person next to them. It was a different world. And now our agents, of course, they're often still at their kitchen tables with their kids trying to get their homework done next to them, and they're doing their best. Yeah, their very best to help you. And the nature of work has changed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's good to hear. I mean, not just about the nature of work, but it's good to hear that you're doing well. But you mentioned kind of agents and stuff there. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was this. You've got this new report out called Resolution Revolution Customer Service Insights Report. And it's a really interesting piece of research. Before, I just wanted to dig into some of the things out of it. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, tell me a little bit about it and how did it come about, and kind of like some of the big headlines for you that are coming out of the research.
Really interesting stuff. So we wanted to find out, did the COVID environment really change things, or was it just things that were kind of happening on their own? Mm-hmm. And what we discovered is absolutely things had changed, frankly, more than we realized might have been in the data.
Right.
And we saw organizations, for example, for the longest time trying to get customers to somehow use their self-service tools as a means to get more efficient on the back end with the agent populations. But it's easier said than done. And meanwhile, we saw the agent populations being managed to things like average handle time and just, and of course, we've talked about this. If you think average handle time is the most important metric for a call center, you're probably trying to solve the wrong problem.
Yeah,
it's a metric to watch, but that's just a measure of how fast you're able to hang up on your customer when you really boil it down. Mm-hmm. And if that's where you're focusing, it's probably not the right place, because if you looked at the things like self-service, what the report said, and the answer is in the name of the report, we ended up calling it the Resolution Revolution because we discovered things actually had changed.
Right.
And in particular, 45% of customers are now more likely to use self-service than they were before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So, and think of your own personal life. We needed the service from time to time, whether it was an airline or otherwise. We would call for service, perhaps, but we were told of these incredible long times to speak with someone. It's still the case today with many. Mm-hmm. And so we were now moved over to self-service, and where it was successful, customers will welcome that. Yeah. They welcome the ability to interact there and get their problem resolved without having to wait. And as a result, that 45% are more likely to use self-service. And then the net metric, according to the research, is that now we see 82% of customers are willing, at least, to use self-service when given the option. The problem is interesting in that the data also showed that while 82% are now willing to use self-service, 46% don't actually expect it to work. So they're going to these self-service channels because they know this. They might as well try it because they have to wait so long. And
that's like a Hail Mary, right? It's just a bit like, I'll give it a go in the vainglorious hope that it might work.
Well, spot on, to use a great British phrase. And where it did work, they were celebrated. Mm-hmm. And where it didn't, it frankly frustrates because they're forced to repeat themselves yet again when they finally have to try and get it somewhere else. And we've been through these self-service experiences that don't work, those old chat bots or dumb bots, as I sometimes call them, that can maybe just answer a few basic questions on when your store hours are, but eventually run out of runway.
Yeah.
And after investing 20 minutes, you're still forced to reach out.
And so you also asked in the report, you asked customers to rank the most important aspects of service experiences. And I mean, is it that they're now starting to say, given that you've talked about the kind of people using more of the self-service tools, I mean, is that becoming one of the biggest aspects in terms of how they gauge kind of service experience? Or is there kind of something else, kind of what are the things that are still top of their list and saying, this is the most important bit, as it were? What are people kind of really looking for?
Well, they're looking for a fast resolution to their problem on whatever channel they're reaching out on.
Right. So they're agnostic about kind of like how and where it kind of comes from. And crumbs, if it's like a speedy carrier pigeon that drops the answer in on their, on their window ledge, then they'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool, that works.
Oh, happily, exactly it. They just want a resolution and to get back with their day. They're not looking they're not looking to make a new BFF, right? They're looking to get their problem solved and get back with their daily life. The problem is really, really interesting stuff in the research, that when it came to the frustrations that they nonetheless felt, mm-hmm. the top frustration for customers and agents alike, or challenges, were actually pretty similar. And for customers, the number one was having to repeat information. followed by things like slow responses and taking too long. But that repetition, we just talked about it, frankly. And when we asked the agent, what are the top 5 challenges of customer service departments, number one challenge was that they are forcing customers to repeat themselves.
I mean, I think that's the kind of, I just want to scream now, because it's like we've all experienced that. We've experienced that for years, if not decades, that sort of frustration. You talk about CRM, and we talk about sort of like, siloed, we talk about siloed ways of working and access to data, not sharing data, not working across kind of teams and all these things. And it's almost a bit like, it's almost a bit being like be thrown into a relay race, right? And you're handed a baton. And you're like going, and before you get the baton, somebody's going, "Who are you? What's your name? Where are you from?" And you're like, "Now run down there and hand it over to that person over there." And then you get there, you're trying to hand it over, and they're like, "Hello, who are you? What's your name? Why are you here?" And it's a bit like going, I feel like I'm just like chasing my tail sort of thing. And it's like, I know that technology and integration and data and systems are there and available to connect these things and to make that thing kind of easy. But it just astonishes me that this is still a thing that's kind of showing up again and again and again. But what's even more astonishing is that actually that frustration is not just shared on a customer side of things, but it's also equally shared on an employee side of things, because it must mean that agents are just like pulling their hair out going, I have to ask people again, why can't I get that stuff carried over? Why can't somebody give me a knowledgeable baton when they're kind of passing it on,
Well, I love the analogy of the baton. As you're telling the story, it reminds me of a movie that's always on in America on the TV, 50 First Dates, where there's a character with a 10-second memory.
Right.
He always introduces himself. "Hi, I'm Bob." Yeah. And the same, that's exactly what you're describing. And when in this scenario where we're talking about the handoff from baton to baton, I mean, we've all been there. Mm-hmm. We're stuck in an IVR asking us for a 16-digit account number. And then it asks us for credit card information. Well, I don't have a credit card. Mm-hmm. And we go through this gauntlet. And eventually after 20 minutes or hours in the IVR, the first question we get asked by an agent is, what's your 16-digit account number? And all the same information yet again. And the pain is felt by the agent. They know full well that the customer has gone through this gauntlet. And they're about to just upset them even more. Mm. So every call just gets started on this really wrong note or suboptimal note. And it doesn't have to be that way. And that's where the crux is. The perception is that this is a problem that's just too hard to solve somehow. And it's just simply not. Mm-hmm. And what's really super interesting about it's certainly about integration across these systems. But what some organizations are realizing is if we could just focus not on the channel, but the journey kind of centrally, mm-hmm. and if we could just somehow figure out how to solve the journey wherever it happens and let it be consumed by the channel, wouldn't that give us a better way forward versus trying to duplicate things and wire things and cobble things together at the channel layer? And that's precisely what's happening across our client base. We saw one American insurer do a really good job of this, where when COVID hit, as an insurer, as you might imagine, they had a lot of inquiries. Mm-hmm. And their top volume inquiries were waiting a long, long time to reach an agent despite their best efforts. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they realized, well, wait, I have already orchestrated how this should be handled in terms of the micro journey, the process under the hood of my agent desktop, not in the desktop, but below in the center. Mm-hmm. And they decided to activate those out into a real intelligent virtual assistant, not a chatbot or a dumb bot, but a real intelligent virtual assistant that understood it was you, Adrian, that just stopped in, mm-hmm. and you perhaps just opened a claim the other day, and you're probably trying to figure out the claim status. And that was their top volume inquiry for claim status. And it could answer client-specific, customer-specific answers around their claim 24 hours a day, but not generic, completely about them. And it was able to resolve in that intelligent virtual assistant almost 80% of the inquiries right there. They didn't have to continue on to an agent where they would obviously do their best to help them, they were able to be resolved right there. So happier customers, they actually share that the NPS scores were tremendous from that intelligent virtual assistant.
I mean, I think it's just about organizing. I think you're absolutely right. It's like focusing on some people call it the conversation, some people call it the micro journey, some people call it jobs to be done, and actually organizing around those things such that it's not about us or the organization or kind of whatever, kind of almost like thinking about we're going to organize ourselves so people do business with us in the way that we want to do business, rather than us kind of moving some boxes around to do business with customers in the way that they want to do kind of business, and almost like aligning around that sort of level of efficiency. And I think it's, that's kind of fascinating. And it's fascinating that that's shared at not just at customer level, but at an agent kind of level. But then the thing where you kind of like where the report went on to it, I mean, I was thinking about some of those experiences, as it were. And this is not something that you majored on in the report, but there was a statistic in the report, and I was like, what the is going on here? Where they said, the incredible stat which says 27% of consumers said that they felt like their entire day had been ruined by bad service, and 1 in 10 nearly cried. And I was a bit like, are you freaking kidding me? I'm like, wow. And I was compelled to write a piece about that where it said how many more customers need to cry. I mean, I was a bit like going, if you're going to motivate kind of people to do some, you just can show them a bunch of pictures of people that are just hurting, right? That's almost as a thing that they, if that's what it's going to take to compel us to make some of these exchanges, which feel quite simple. But I wanted to ask you about that, because I think it's a wild statistic, and it shows that the impact of the work is important. But it's also, I wanted to get your view on the idea if it's having that sort of impact on customers. And funny enough, when I wrote that and I put it on LinkedIn about a month ago, that piece on LinkedIn has been viewed nearly 9,000 times, which is crazy to me. I was like, really? And it's like, it must have struck a nerve. But it also made me think, and there's something I wanted to ask you about, it's like, if that's affecting customers, many customers in that way, is it right to assume that it's probably affecting employees in a similar sort of way as well? Whether it's kind of frustrations or just kind of like, I don't know, there's an emotional impact to the work, because most people, many agents that I've met, they want to do a great job, but sometimes you just feel hampered.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. And I mean, it was an incredible statistic. 1 in 10 cried or nearly cried, and we've heard that analogy, Adrian, where people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you felt.
Yeah,
and
Maya Angelou, I believe.
Well done. And that's what it's all about. And the same holds to be true whether it's the customer remembering that and deciding to take their businesses elsewhere, or that agent that really wants to be doing that great job, to your point, but it's just so hard. It's just so hard. And whether it's the frustration of, again, asking customers questions are just going to upset them because they've already answered them somewhere else, or the fact that you have to jump through hoops and acrobatics just to get your job done every time, solving things through brute force, just trying to succeed despite all the 30 different systems you have to navigate and become expert on, which is why the agent turnover has historically, of course, been so high. 35, 45% agent turnover rates.
Yeah.
No wonder.
I mean, you think about it as well. It's like, it might affect a customer if they might go through this and they might do it once a day, once a week, once a month, whatever. But agents are doing this, are dealing with some of these inquiries on a hour by hour basis, and that's just got to be tough. And I think it's crazy, but I just thought it was such a wonderful statistic in that it shone a light on the emotional impact that service has and how how important it is. And it's not that I've not seen that sort of like impact statistic kind of come up very often. So I thought it was really kind of good, and I was really pleased to pleased in a conflicted way, if you know what I mean. So oh my God, but then, oh my word, in many ways. But is there anything else in the kind of report that you think that stood out for you? Because for me, that was the one big one. That was like the big headline. I was like, wow, that's crazy. Apart from the list and the shared frustration, what other things kind of stood out for you, the report that you think, yeah, that was surprising, or we need to do better on that?
Well, there are a few others. It's interesting when we saw some of the responses from businesses. Despite statistics like the one you just mentioned, we saw that 72% believe their organizations provide better customer service than their competitors. Which, if you think about the math there, it's statistically possible for them to say that. It's just physically impossible for them to be that way. Mm-hmm. You can't have the majority saying that they're better than everybody else. But that's the perception. Mm-hmm. We have to be wonderful, aren't we? And it's just it's that outside-in perspective that's so needed. And despite statistics like that, we saw 80% of businesses admit that the quality of service is actually different across the channels, which is why we saw another set of statistics of 50% of customers saying that they're only selecting the phone because they think it's the only way that they can effectively get their issue resolved. Mm. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I saw it was fascinating because in another piece I wrote recently was talking about, digital and product teams. And it's like this, you're referring to some of these perception gaps that exist between the way that organizations and leaders think about their own service and as compared to kind of their competitors or the way their customers think about it. And we talk about how customers choose their phone as a default because they believe that's the only way they're going to get a decent resolution or get closer resolution. And that's to do with their faith in sort of digital products or web-based solutions or whatever it might be. And I saw this other piece of research which was showing that despite the fact that you have all these digital and product teams that are using all these fancy tools and developing in an iterative kind of like fashion, the majority of them think they're doing a great job and delivering kind of like products and services that their customers want, and their customers are going, no. So it's about like 90%. Yeah, we're doing a great job, and customers are going about half of them, less than half of them go, nah, these haven't been designed with us in kind of mind. You haven't been talking kind of to us, and yet when you dig into that, and some of the data kind of like shows they've got all this data and analytics kind of like tools and everything else, but they still don't understand the journey and why people are dropping off and what they're doing and everything else. And it's a bit like you're living in clouds, I don't know, fairyland. It's like a Disney movie, sort of some of these sort of things. And I think and what it does do to me, it sort of blows up this idea that people go, oh yeah, we're adopting this kind of agile approach. Well, I have a bit of a bugbear about some of that sort of stuff because sometimes you become more of a master of a process rather than the master of the essence of what are you trying to do, which is trying to develop something fast and iteratively so you can learn as much as you possibly can. So you plot the shortest route to kind of get something which works for all parties. But what the data is showing is like you might be mastering the process, but you're not learning very much and you're not talking to very many people. And it was just like, come on, people, do some better work here. I mean, it's like, it's important. Crumbs. I don't want to swear here, but like, Christ.
Well, and I think it's also a bit to do with the perception agent of where you're solving the problem. Again, 80% are admitting that the level of service is different across channels. So they may be doing well in a particular channel or setting, but that's not the customer's problem. The customer maybe eventually got there, but they tried to get that answer first on their mobile app and failed. They tried then to get the resolution on your website with your chatbot, and then they failed. And then they tried to call someone to get stuck in an IBR to eventually get to someone. So it's the customer's journey that matters. And I think you had an interesting piece that you wrote on Forbes a little while back on the emerging landscape of service. I think it is changing.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of built on something that I remember a conversation that you had with Paul Greenberg, who we both know pretty well. And I think you talked about the surface area of service. And I was like, brilliant. I really love that. It's gone from preemptive, predictive, into proactive, into sort of self-service, into sort of assisted and enabled across the piece. And I thought it was a really, really, really useful way of describing kind of the landscape. And I was thinking about it and thinking about it with respect to the research and things, and thinking about, well, actually, that's the customer side of things. And I started thinking about it, started developing I'd been thinking about some of this stuff for a while, but then your and Paul's discussion sort of catalyzed that, because we know that there's a link between customer experience and employee experience. But the thing that always struck me when people talk about employee experience, that they don't generally get to the operational side of the employee experience. And so everything is around, learning and development, kind of payroll, admin stuff and everything else. And so it kind of comes up. And then there's the kind of the operational bit, and there's this gap. And it made me think that actually we need to think about, how do we operationalize the agent's experience to deliver that good customer experience in the moment when we know that it's important and it's critical, particularly when you end up with those live interactions, whether it's across kind of a chat function, asynchronous messaging, phone, email, all these different sort of things, which we know when things get complex and difficult and things can't be delivered by self-service, that actually those are the things that deliver the most value, the most have the greatest positive impact on a customer's overall experience. And it made me think about, actually, maybe is it going to be useful to start thinking about the operational aspect of an employee's experience, an agent's experience, and can we think about it in the same way as we think about customer experience, i.e., is there assisted, is there enabled, is there proactive, is there preemptive and predictive, and so on and so forth. So you end up with this mirror image of dimensions, as it were. So yeah, I struggled with that. It was like a plate of spaghetti in my head for a while. But your kind of piece can help. You can like put it all together and string it all out. But I know you saw it, and I thought, actually, what do you think, Jeff? Am I mad? Are we there? Are we close? Is it kind of like it's sort of over the horizon a little bit, or where are we at with that?
Well, there's a number of questions there. Are you mad? Absolutely, but for totally different reasons, and all good reasons. But are you mad in that piece? Absolutely not. I think you hit the nail on the head. The way I tend to think of it, Adrian, is that when it comes to friction, mm-hmm. there are two sides. There are two sides to that equation. You actually can't have friction without two parties rubbing up against each other.
That's fair, very fair. Yeah, great point.
And the customer side is one, mm-hmm. and that's where we focused in that particular piece, where we talk about how do we understand the problem we're trying to solve outside in for customers, whether it's engaging with an agent fully or assisted, or moving through this new generation of self-service wrapped around the journey to eventually proactive and preemptive. But on the employee side, there's a whole other set of friction. The way I think of that problem and opportunity, it's almost like you have a sine wave. And if you picture the wave going up and down, you have a line cutting through the center. And below that line, I think of that as the things that take away from productivity and really don't add a lot of value in the day, where automation can help a great deal. So the copying and pasting manually across applications, literally the Post-its that your agents are using to transfer information across screens because they're not integrated, but they still have to bring it back into another. All these things that take them away, just doing data entry, mm-hmm. Logging into systems by hand because they're not integrated with single sign-on. Yeah. This is what life is like, just to get to their job. And
building on that kind of, because if I can, building on that kind of you use the idea of a sine wave.
Yes.
But actually, what you end up with is if you get, because it makes me think that you talk about friction on the customer side in their experience, but actually if the employee faces friction, as it were, in their side, then you end up with these kind of like these two sine waves that are out of sync. And then you end up with kind of interference and distortion and of the signal, as it were. So, but when you get them in sync, then you end up with a more powerful signal.
I love it. Well, isn't that how noise canceling headphones work?
Yeah,
they produce the inverse wave, and then finally you have a nice flat line. And I love that analogy as well. And the way you get there, to get there is unfortunately, you can't just solve the bottom of the sine wave. I'll have to go back to the top of the sine wave for the agent as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I believe things like AI can come into play. So ways that you can deepen and enrich the experience for the agent and make their life easier to do the things that do add value.
Yeah.
And that means using AI to understand what's being said in the text stream, mm-hmm. and helping pre-populate a response that's completely contextual around the customer, so that the agent doesn't have to go to 30 systems to pull in an understanding. Mm-hmm. Or surfacing automatically, we're building this right now, the ability to surface into the agent screen knowledge content that's completely contextual and relevant to the conversation based mm-hmm. upon what's being said and asked by the customer.
Yeah.
And that can, whether it's text-based or voice-based, mm-hmm. Using real-time speech analytics. So make their world better, enrich the response to the customer.
Yeah.
So they can focus on the customer finally.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is that sort of thing, is that if you can start to think about it that way and how those two worlds kind of meet, then you can end up kind of getting really, it becomes really kind of like rich. You're really rich in terms of the possibilities of how you can sort of orchestrate and support those kind of experiences. I think one of the challenges is that many players sometimes don't think about that much, because actually some of them I think choose to rather not talk about or spend a lot of time on the phone channel or the email channel or kind of the chat channel or the messaging channel, because it's like they want to try and automate everything to minimize kind of that, but without kind of realizing that contact is likely in many places always going to be there, always going to be important, always going to be impactful. And therefore, I think that contact deserves as sophisticated a level of attention as other places going to do, to try and to acknowledge that it will be kind of here for a while. And the more we do to make it kind of better, the better the experiences that we're likely to produce. But I was just wanted to think about that, because I want to ask about that, because that's just like a bit of a vision of that sort of way of doing it. Now, I spoke to a guy at Deloitte Digital, a guy called Andy Haas, who's kind of in the contact center sort of space, and he reckoned that we don't really see sort of integrated platforms that are if you like, supporting that agent experience where it meets the customer's experience kind of now, not in the way that we're sort of talking about it. You reckon so we're probably still 2 to 5 years away from it. I know that other people think that we're probably less than that. It's probably more of a 2 years away from it. I mean, what do you think, Jeff? You're kind of in the weeds in this. I mean, do you think that the emergence of that sort of like connected, supported, orchestrated sort of platform that focuses on that agent experience is there, or is it already there in some parts?
Oh, sure. It is already there in some parts. Absolutely. And so we have clients deploying that today. Mm-hmm. And it's the aspect we talked about. You have to be able to acknowledge the complexity that's there, but not let it hold you back. You need a different approach to solving and simplifying the complexity. Mm-hmm. For the sake of your agent, for the sake of your customers. And you can do that now without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You can do it by wrapping into the existing systems. And part of the science there is what we talked about before. By not trying to solve the customer journey or the agent experience just in one spot, but can you solve it agnostically? So frankly, it shouldn't matter what desktop your agents are using if you're solving the right thing below the surface, if you're automating the right processes below the hood, so that they don't have to deal with it through brute force.
Yeah. So let me ask you kind of like a couple of kind of like, just a couple of things, because I know that you're, I've always had a lot of time and respect for Pega and kind of, everybody there, and also kind of like kind of what you're kind of doing. I mean, and I've always thought that you guys were pushing the conversation out in front in many respects, and talked about all sorts of different, next best action, and then kind of empathy and service, and kind of decision-making hubs and all these things. It's always kind of like it's all on the front cusp, or almost like a step in front, as it were. And so, what I wanted to ask you was like, given that you're at that in the heart of it, what do you think is what do you see about this sort of future of service and experience? I mean, and what are you seeing that's kind of come up that are some of the big challenges you think that we need to avoid or go around or under or over or whatever, that we need to kind of, we need to be mindful of in order to keep or to improve the outcomes that we're delivering?
So I really do believe we're at a bit of an inflection point. And when it comes to what are the things that you want to avoid, make sure you're solving the right problem, first and foremost. Right. If you're just trying to do automation for automation's sake, in many cases, you just end up automating a bad process, making it faster. And so having a forcing function to take a step back and understanding what should the customer journey really be here.
If you can hear that siren in the background, that's not for me, I hasten to add.
Not in this case. Yes. That's in the forefront. And ultimately, when it comes to what's coming next, there's an interesting piece of data. 60% of customers in this report, of businesses, service leaders, said they believe that COVID's going to have long-term consequences for customer service, in particular when it comes to the digital-led strategies. And that's because of the things we talked about, where customers are now willing to use these things like self-service more than they were before. Yeah. But you got to prove it.
Yeah.
You have to prove it. And part of the way forward is this aspect we talked about where we're activating journey wherever the customer goes. That's that new category that you and I have discussed in the past of autonomous customer service.
Yeah.
Where if you can just solve journey once, and whether it's an agent or an autonomous channel, which they're going to become more and more of, completely digital, able to resolve issues, intelligent virtual assistants and beyond, if you could just organize their own journey in the center, then this is a new way forward. Then it doesn't really matter what channel is closest to your customer at that time, because you're going to be able to rise to that challenge in many, if not most cases.
And what are the sort of the things that you think, because it feels like, you talk about an inflection point, and we talk about these recurring or persistent sort of frustrations, both on the agent side and the customer side. I mean, it feels to me that kind of organizations are going to need to just be different, as it were, almost like develop new behaviors, new habits, new mindsets and things. I mean, what do you think? What are you seeing as some of the key characteristics that those organizations are that they have, if you like, or they embody, that's going to help them succeed? Because it just feels like we've gone through such big change, but there's a danger that we've changed because we've had to, and then many people will snap back. But actually, people need to kind of like retain the learnings and kind of like almost plot a new path, as it were. So, what are the things what are the characteristics you think the organizations are going to need to develop in order to keep them, or to allow them to emerge? Yeah, on top of that 72% who think they're better than everybody else.
Well, exactly right. And the ones that win they'll be the ones that continue. You hinted at it, to continue to iterate. And what happened when COVID hit, nearly every organization out there had been talking about digital transformation for some time. A lot of talk. And someday we're going to be doing this massive digital transformation, and I'm going to budget a program for 2 years from now, and we're going to get started. Well, COVID forced organizations to rush to that starting line. And many did some fast things. Well, other ones did fast things that were just Band-Aids and very small things like that, little chatbots that they stood up, but don't really do a whole lot.
Sure.
And versus those that really stood up, really brilliant, intelligent virtual assistants that understood you as your journey, not the products outward. And those worked well. So the ones that are going to win are the ones that are going to continue on that path to how to organize around journey centrally, regardless of the system or channel. And continue to build resolutions to those micro journeys in the center, and then activate them out just to channel after channel after channel, just continue to progress. The ones that are going to probably have a tough time are the ones that are taking their foot off the gas now, having done some small moves to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
And kind of consider, mission accomplished. And, I think they're going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening.
And so, you've alluded to it a couple of times. You talked about these, maybe cases that companies for that have stood up, not just like a simple chatbot, but they stood up an intelligent agent that's been autonomous, that's kind of been able to deal with these micro journeys and being able to kind of, and serve a whole bunch of customers and really perform. I mean, do you have an example of a brand that's done just that and what they've been able to accomplish and kind of sort of what makes it sort of different? Because sometimes people, will kind of see some of these things on the surface, they'll go, oh, it's the same as that. But I want to dig into that just to make sure people understand that it's not the same.
Well, sure. And I think I'll just go back to the same example we chatted about earlier with that American insurer, that when they were able to activate the exact same end-to-end service orchestrated journey or process that their agents were applying out to that other channel, not duplicating it, just extending it. And that the results were there quite immediately. It was a very fast change, number one. This is not something that took quarters to accomplish. This was rapid because they already had that starting point done in the center. And by doing that, those resolutions were there. And then again, 80% of those highest volume inquiries now being contained there 24/7 with incredible NPS scores. But what it does is really incredibly interesting. It changes the nature of work for agents. And we are seeing a shift where the agent's role, I think, is going to improve. And it's going to move from all these high volume, low complexity inquiries. We're going to move those off to the autonomous channels near term. And the ones that are more complex, more involved, require more empathy. You and I have talked about that at length, and more of a personal touch. Those are the ones that the agents are going to be able to spend time on that, where the impact is really there.
And it sort of surprises me that sometimes I find myself in a state of continuous surprise, because sometimes the evidence and the data is always been there. I.e., the 80% of, say, an assurer's demand for help has probably been for simple inquiries, but it's taken a massive event to really force them to get in front of it. And I sometimes wonder, is that also the thing that people are also going to be learning? This idea that it shouldn't take a crisis for us to make big steps. And if that's the biggest lesson that many organizations kind of like learn from that, it's actually sometimes the answers are right in front of us. We just need to go and look for them and then kind of respond to them and do something about them in a very smart, very outcome sort of focused kind of way. Then we won't go far wrong.
I don't think I could say it much better than that, Adrian.
So, Jeff, boiling it down a little bit, because we talked about lots of different things. You've worked with lots of big brands, with around the world. And a lot of people are kind of thinking about this, and they might be managing a whole portfolio of stuff, and it's all get very complex and quite confusing. But if I was to say to you, what would be your best advice to somebody who's a lead-in service or experience in one of these brands, and they want to improve the experience that they deliver? What would be the first thing? What would be your best advice? What would be the first thing that you would say to them?
So use this moment as a moment of opportunity, as an inflection point. You have wind at your back. For the longest time leading into this moment, we were trying to convince customers to use somehow our self-service options. They're out there. And they weren't willing, but now they are. And so when they're going to your website, interesting, north of 50% of customers, apparently, according to the data, are actually going to your website first before they call you, even if it's just to find your phone number. They're going there. And so when they go to those web properties, challenge yourself. What is the experience they're seeing? Are you serving up your product information? And do they have to go sift through it to go find what they're looking for generically? And as no surprise, do they end up calling you anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Or when they get there, and maybe you're in banking, they're authenticated. You know exactly who they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know exactly that they just overdrew their account, or that they just ran their wireless plan. Probably a good chance that's why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can you understand the journey that they're on, and can you infuse into that journey an understanding and a personalized action? It says, "Hey, John, I know that this is probably why you're here. Do you want to know the latest status in that insurance claim that you just opened yesterday?" I would. Do you want to know the next steps in the process? Sure. Well, here's a knowledge article or a video that'll walk you through it.
Mm-hmm.
And can you serve up the outside in the right experience for that journey where your customer goes first?
Mm-hmm.
Not, can I just get it right when they eventually get down to my agent? And I think that's one of the great opportunities. Take that outside in focus, understand where your customers are going first to find resolution to their service issue versus where they end up last.
Thank you. So just to wrap up, before we go, this is my we call it my longitudinal social research project that I append to all of these interviews, where I ask all of the people I'm speaking to, and I haven't asked you before because this is prior to the Punk CX book, but I've been asking people two sort of a word association questions. And the first one is, what one word would you, one or maybe two words, would you use to describe a more punk approach experience?
A more punk approach.
I warn you, there are 140 words on my list.
Well, I think going down to brass tacks, it's probably just two words: solve it. So regardless of the obstacles that you need to get to, just solve it for the customer. And what the interesting thing about that, when you think of it this way, it doesn't mean solve it when they come to you. In the new world of customer service, my prediction is that the ones that do customer service best are going to be the ones that are not just reactive in their service strategy, but the ones that solve it by understanding you may have a service issue before you reach out, or perhaps you're trending toward a service issue before you realize it and reach out to you. Mm-hmm. So that you're able to solve it, not just when it's realized, but sometimes perhaps when it isn't realized. And I think there's a great line in the customer service industry on the best service is no service. I'm not sure the person who originally coined it, but good credit should go to them. And solve it. I think that's how I would just boil it down.
Well, I know that's not on the list, so welcome to the pantheon of kind of punk CX words, because I know that that's not on the list, so that will get included. So that's brilliant. And so the second question is, what brand or organization do you think epitomizes that sort of approach?
So, I mean, there's so many of them out there that are starting to emerge. We had one UK client, Step Change, a debt charity, who did a great keynote at a recent Pega World. Mm-hmm. And they frankly just got to solving it. They during climate, they had a number of consumers, of course, looking for debt relief. And mm-hmm. they realized that just having them call up to have these issues met really was forcing them to jump through hoops at a difficult time. And so they actually gave them a lot more choice by expanding directly into things like mobile. And it ended up 70% of the customers switched over to using mobile, and they just went to solve it. Right. Where the customers were versus making them come to them. Mm-hmm. It sounds simple, but I think with such a timely, important thing, going to where the customers wanted service, for them made all the difference.
That's perfect. That's a great example. Thank you, Jeff. So, Jeff, that's all I have. I think we're kind of unless there's anything else you want to kind of say, I think we can call that a wrap.
No, as always, I love having these conversations with you. You always seem to really give such interesting perspectives, and really looking forward to the next time.
Perfect. Jeff, it's been An absolute pleasure. And I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and your insight with us today. That's been awesome.
My pleasure.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.